Travel back in time with a trip inside the Iowa's News Now vault.
MASH will not be seen tonight, so that we may bring you the following 2 Action News special. Join host Chuck Shalene for an informative look into the plight of Iowa's farmers as we present Harvest of Discontent.
Good evening, I'm Chuck Shalene. We're glad you could be with us tonight. Here in eastern Iowa, we are certainly familiar with the farm crisis, the economic conditions that are causing so many problems for farmers directly and everyone else in Iowa indirectly have been well documented. So tonight we won't talk much about the reasons why agriculture is going through such great changes or how the economic problems might be solved. Tonight we are going to take a closer look at the human side of the crisis, at the emotions many rural people are feeling, at the stress that led to the recent tragedy in Johnson County, and what can help avoid more violence. Our guests are Peter Zevenbergen, Lynn County Mental Health Director. Peter has done extensive farm counseling in northwest Iowa before moving to Cedar Rapids recently. Gene Hood, an Iowa State University Extension Human Development Specialist, is with us. Gene will be talking about several programs available to help farmers financially and emotionally. And Joanne Dvorak of the Family Service Agency is also with us. Joanne is the coordinator of the Farmer-to-Farmer support group in this area. Tonight we'll also hear from farmers affected by stress, a nationally recognized expert on the extent of the problem, and from others who can help us better understand the situation and what we can expect in the future. We'll get started in a moment.
When you're away from home and road conditions become hazardous, tune to the KGAN Weather Network on radio. Meteorologist Dave Town and Don Keith will provide you with up-to-the-minute road conditions, plus a complete and accurate weather forecast for eastern Iowa. Tune in the KGAN Weather Network on KXIC Iowa City, KXEL and KOKZ Waterloo, KCDR Cedar Rapids, and KCII AM and FM Washington. When you're on the road, know what lies ahead. Tune in the KGAN Weather Network on radio.
Welcome back. 9 days ago, we found out what stress can lead to. Johnson County farmer Dale Burr killed his wife, his banker, his neighbor, and finally himself. It was the first time that farm stress has led directly to a killing spree. There have been other killings related to farm problems, but in those cases, the farmers were known as radicals. As Barry Butters reports, Dale Burr was no radical.
Real easy going. Just, he never had an enemy. And you could work for him day in and day out. The man never got mad. He never would raise his voice. Friendly to anyone. And just a good neighbor. Just a super fella all the way around.
In the wake of the Hills tragedy, some people have called Dale Burr a murderer. He was, but not the type of person you associate with the word.
Well, he's always a nice guy, you know. He's a big farmer. I've known him for about 20 years probably. And he's easygoing, real nice fella.
Most people say something inside of Dale Burr just snapped. It did. And the results of that snap are causing many Americans to examine the crisis and the pressure it's put on farmers.
I think it has to be seen as an irrational act. But it also can serve as a reminder of what happens when stress in life becomes so great that people lose contact with reality. I think that's a real danger, that when one's livelihood and when one's security system is so threatened, people lose contact with reality.
There is no question that Dale Burr was, or at least felt he was, in deep financial trouble. A few weeks ago, he told his sister and brother-in-law that he saw no way out of it.
He had gone to the bank on a Friday, and ahead of when he came here, and he said they told him to sell his livestock, they would sell his machinery, and you could rent out your land. And he said, what am I going to do? He said, I ain't got anything left. He said, they've taken all my corn that's in the field as well as in the bins. And he said, I don't have money to buy groceries.
I think he dealt with it for so long, maybe he was just weary of battling in his mind. I don't mean battling people, battling it in his mind.
If you knew him, you never would believe this.
He was devoted to his family.
Yep.
There's no question about that.
Why Dale Burr decided to take so many lives will never be known. In a 7-word suicide note, he explained why he took his own. He said, "I'm sorry, I can't handle the problems."
Joanne, I'd like to start things off by asking you about the Dale Burr incident and how that's affected farmers that you've talked to at the Farmer to Farmer support groups. How do they feel about this?
Farmers are deeply saddened. They feel as though things have been building to a point where some folks don't know how to handle the pressures that they're dealing with. That's part of what they've tried to do, is offer a place where folks can talk about their feelings so that those feelings are verbalized rather than actualized.
Are farmers worried that you know, the general population, it's been given a lot of national coverage. It was a big news story. Networks all covered it. Maybe farmers feel that this might drive a wedge between them and everyone else, make it look like farmers are all gun crazy out here?
The farmers that I've worked with have felt as though the nation needs to know the difficult situation that we're working with. And it took a tragedy like this for that to happen. But if folks understand what we're dealing with, it may help them to not pull away from us, but to have a greater understanding of the complexities of the issues at hand.
Peter, there's been several scathing editorials in the newspapers, state newspapers, about Dale Burr and about the fact that he isn't a martyr. And I know you have some thoughts on that.
Well, I don't think that Dale Burr is a martyr, and I don't think that that you can equate good coming out of a violent situation like this. At the same time, I think that we have to have some understanding of what people in similar situations like Dale Burr are going through, and that we can't deny that exists. We can't at the same time condone this kind of thing happening. I don't think that the nation needs to find out about our farm problem with this kind of event, and I think that overwhelming majority of farmers agree with that. I think at the same time we do need to understand the difficulties and the depth of that problem that these people are experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Gene, turning to you, what are your thoughts on the problem recently? It's apparently been building up, and now out in the countryside the stress is growing daily.
Well, I think that's very true, Chuck, and I live in Johnson County, so the impact of the tragedy certainly was there with me. I think it's certainly heightens the awareness of people to the problem. I think it really brings to the forefront with agency people the need to really have services available, and I think that the agency people in Johnson County are really trying to respond.
Mm-hmm. I said earlier we weren't going to talk too many specifics on economic problems causing all this stress, but maybe we should touch on it for a moment. There's been reports about Dale Burr's financial condition, the fact that there are many other farmers in worse shape. Is that true?
Oh, I'm sure that's true. I think it's really important for farmers to find out what their economic situation really is, and I think there are some farmers who, though because of all of the publicity, etc., really are doubting their own financial state. And I think it's important for them to really reach out for information. For example, the Extension Service has a FinPack, which really helps them look at their own situation. But the situation is rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little later we're going to talk more about the services available to help financially and mentally. A very important question that a lot of people are asking right now is what's the extent of the problem? How many people are experiencing stress related to the farm situation? Well, no one really knows for sure, but certainly the number is growing. Tipton looks unusual this year. That's because 1,400 acres of corn has not yet been harvested. An early winter caught many by surprise this year, but that's not why this corn is standing. If the crop was in the bin, Billick says his bank could claim it, so he says he won't harvest it until his legal problems with the bank are settled.
You don't sleep a lot of nights, and It gets to you when you get up every morning and have to look out over a field of corn that you can't get out yet.
While Billick's particular problem may be somewhat unique, he is certainly not alone. Iowa State University economist Neil Harl talked about the increasing number of farmers facing serious financial problems at a farm crisis seminar this week.
It's very difficult to put it into numbers, and it depends on how much stress you're talking about, because fully a third and maybe 40% are suffering very substantial stress. But for the 10 to 15% most heavily indebted, they are suffering, of course, the greatest amount of stress. And for them, stress is an everyday part of life. It's almost a devastating force operating upon them because they simply do not see how they can become stable and avoid the inexorable slide toward insolvency.
But it's not just farmers. Farm equipment dealerships are going under, and many small-town businesses are suffering. Harl says it will get worse because of reduced property tax revenue.
At the same time, of course, the federal revenue sharing is being cut back, so we see a wave yet to come of substantial impact on local governments, the full range of local governmental units.
Perhaps most disturbing, Harl says the end is not in sight. Without drastic economic changes, he predicts 5 to 7% of the nation's farmers will reach insolvency each year for at least the next 3 years.
Each winter, until this thing is resolved, may very well become just a little bit more severe, a little bit more grim. But certainly the 85-86 period, the winter of 85-86 will probably be more severe and more grim than 84-85 was.
So it seems that learning to cope with stress will be the most important skill for farmers, their families, and many others in Iowa to learn.
Oh, I'm not afraid to admit I've got problems, but some people probably are, and they just keep quiet too long.
Apparently that is the first step, Pete, admitting the problem and being willing to talk about it.
Yes, I think that definitely one of the major problems for farmers is overcoming that step that we call denial and admitting that there's a problem and trying to get some help with that.
Mm-hmm. How many farmers are out there now that are in serious trouble that aren't admitting it? Would you say a lot at this point?
I think that throughout Iowa that's probably true. I think that as has come out in the Dale Burr situation, he was talking to somebody about it. We may not be reading the signs accurately at times either. I think increasingly we are seeing farm families talk about the problem and therefore opening some doors to getting some help with it.
Yeah. I think farm families have had a tradition too of really taking care of their own problems and handling it themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard sometimes to really begin verbalizing and to reach out.
There's no doubt about that.
What comes next then after you take the big step and admit the problem? What comes next, Jean?
I think one of the things is to try to find perhaps a support group, and for example, Joanne has the farmer-to-farmer group. Extension will have some neighbor-to-neighbor groups, but to begin reaching out, and it depends on the kind of help that you need too. Really trying to locate the kind of help that you need. One possibility is, for example, calling the Rural Concern Hotline or some of the other hotlines that are available to really get. I think sometimes when we can begin to intellectualize the gut feelings that are going on inside, it really begins helping us start on a road, a process to deal with the stress that we're feeling.
Joanne, tell me a little bit more about the farmer-to-farmer support groups. How long have they been going in this area?
First meeting of the farmer-to-farmer support group was one group that met in March of '85, and they're continuing to grow a phenomenal rate at this point. We started with adult groups, and a lot of that is listening, having someone to listen to you who understands the complexities of what you're dealing with, peers, and then having someone there who can assist you with linkage to other services if that's needed. We're now beginning to deal with youth, particularly at the high school level, children who had planned on careers in farming and now are not sure that that's a viable solution for them.
What happens at a support group meeting? I noticed in your brochure it says this is not a therapy group.
No, they're not therapy groups. They're informational, they're emotional support, a chance to express and explore some of those feelings and where that's coming from, and increase that communication within the family and within the group to share information too.
What does the county have to offer?
Well, my experiences primarily in Northwest Iowa, where I was the mental health director of a mental health center that served 9 rural counties, and we have been at support groups for almost 2 years. and extensive network of them. The Mental Health Center primarily serves Lynn and Jones County, and we have a support group in Monticello that meets on Thursday evenings, and are expanding on that. Our primary emphasis has been in Jones County because that's the most rural one for us. We have done a lot of work with Farmer to Farmer and provided some support to them. I think it's extremely important to recognize at the same time that a lot of systems, whether they be the clergy or whether they be the school system or they be extension, mental health centers, Farmer to Farmer, I think it's important for farm families who are experiencing the stress to identify some people that can be of some help to them, that can provide some support. So in some ways, some of these people are going to use existing systems or existing support systems, whereas others are going to have to identify for themselves ones they feel safe with. And I think that can be helpful. The first step is reaching out and identifying that I've got a problem and I need to talk about it. That will diffuse the potential situations like we experienced in Hills.
Joanne, and how are the people handling the meetings? Is it are they pretty upbeat, or when they go there, can you expect to be involved in a lot of depression?
Some of the figures that we're dealing with are pretty grim, and some of the situations that farm families are living through are not upbeat. We deal with that emotion, and from those groups, each group decides what their goals and agendas are going to be. So there's a lot of ownership. I don't come in and tell people what we're going to do. The farm families involved in groups make those decisions. They've also expressed a concern for a need for some positives from this, as what we had out at Mount Vernon when the farmers came together and had a potluck and shared some good times.
Well, glad you mentioned that, so we're going to take a look at that right now. There, as we've been talking about, there are quite a few services available to help farmers and others who are under stress. Right now, John Okerstrom takes a closer look at how a couple of those services work.
During the rush of spring planting, the hurried pace of harvest, and the dead of winter, a chorus of Iowa farmers has cried out for help. From this Des Moines office, the Rural Concern Hotline answers those calls.
Tell me about it.
7,500 since its beginning in February.
Right now, I think the stress is increasing.
Chuck Conover farmed for 30 years. Now he's part of the team here, helping others make some tough decisions, referring them to local services and agencies who can help.
Can I help you, please?
There are ministers who are available. There are support groups. There are mental health centers who have been gearing up for the people with the added stress.
Rural Concern, can I help you?
More people are aware that they're not the only one in this problem, and that helps to take some of the strain off of them.
It's that idea that makes support groups like Farmer to Farmer work. This weekend, a fundraising jamboree, a chance for people to talk about the challenge and pain of trying to survive tough times.
It's a struggle right now. We have to find off-farm income, which for me and my husband is fine because we're in our 30s, but his parents are 61.
Too often, the auctioneer's cry signals foreclosure, the death of a family farm. But in this case, it means operating money for Farmer to Farmer. Like Rural Concern Hotline, the group provides conversation and referral services. And there is another similarity. The people on the phones and in this support group cling to hope, perhaps because it's the most productive way to attack their problems, perhaps because it's all they have left.
Come up empty-handed more than once, and I guess that's fine, because I don't come up empty-handed. Don't come up empty-handed. Well, I don't come up empty-handed all the time. Thank you.
Slowly building, and they're getting a lot of calls, aren't they?
Yes, they are. It's Prairie Fire also, another name for that. They have been servicing calls from farmers for some time.
Gene, the other hotline, Rural Concern, Extension Service, a lot of different groups involved in that, Farm Credit System, Farmers Home, the Department of Agriculture, Farm Bureau. It's a kind of a cooperative effort, and we were there earlier this week, and apparently they had 340 calls last week alone.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. And Extension staff did help in identifying agency people and all kinds of help within every county. I think it's important, Chuck, that we realize that a farm family may not like to go to some help in their own county. They may want to cross county lines. And I think that's one of the really neat parts about those two hotlines, that they really help people know where help is available. If you say, I don't want to go there, they've got another place, and that's important. You know, sometimes I don't want to go if you're going to see me go in the door. And I'd rather go across the county line and go somewhere else.
Also, it's easier to pick up the telephone and just call, and they're confidential.
There's a lot of anonymity with the phone
That's
call,
right.
and there's a lot of information available.
I'm going to take a moment right now to mention something else. The Northeast Iowa Mental Health Center is offering a special service coming up on Monday the 23rd of December. It is kind of a special day. You can come in or call in, and they're offering some free counseling, and it's strictly confidential, and that's the Northeast Iowa Mental Health Center at Olwine. So a lot of people are getting involved in this. What happens when you call them on the phone? What do you talk about? Just anything? I know there's legal counseling that can be available, whatever, I guess.
When you're calling a hotline, they have referral services, they can counsel, legal information, stress information. They're there to handle just about the whole gamut.
At the same time, they're there more for referral than they are to be able to answer all the specifics.
Yeah.
I think, particularly the Rural Concern Hotline at Iowa State, they have some experts from the standpoint of an attorney and some farm management specialists that can answer some specifics. At the same time, if the problem is emotional, they aren't going to spend a lot of time counseling. They're going to help people get into services closer to home.
Gene, tell me about the other services available from the Extension Service.
Okay. I think one of the important things is certainly the FinPAC, which comes from Minnesota, but helps people really look at their economic situation. It's done very confidentially, and we're very happy to have Don Benning and Nancy Barrickman on our staff who will take care of that for families and really get them started looking intellectually at that economic situation. Another thing that we have, and I realize we're a little slow coming out with it, but we have tested the program in support groups in Ottumwa and in Mason City. Based on the things that the families said to us, we have put together a neighbor-to-neighbor program, and we'll be holding some informational meetings around the various counties in our Cedar Rapids area this next month in January, so that people can be aware of those. This is a support group where families can get together. They'll have the study guides. We'll help them set up their first meeting, but they're really going to be kind of on their own. However, we're going to be there to help if they want some resource people. We also have a home study program, and maybe I'm doing okay as a farmer, but I really want to be able to help another person, and I think the Stress on the Farm home study gives me some information. There are chapters on depression, the conflict that comes about in the intergenerational situation. So by taking that home study course, I can get some information that might help me be a helper to someone else.
Joanne, you had mentioned that the farmer-to-farmer groups are growing in numbers very quickly. What about funding for these programs? Is that a problem?
Funding with any agency is an ever ongoing problem because things are, the demand is increasing. We are searching out other grant forms and looking for funding to support. I wanted to bring up one other point about the support groups, that support groups are not just farm families who are in financial difficulty. They're for farm families who are interested in maintenance of family farm operations. They're for some families who are making adjustments, using assists or the FinPAC through extension to make sure they know where their situation is. We want people to have information before it's too late. They're also for those who are making the transition. So it's not necessarily you're just in trouble.
Right, and some support groups, and I'm not sure about farmer to farmer, but the support group that we have in Monticello is not just for farmers. Because one of the things we're seeing in rural communities is that the fallout from farmers being in difficulty is also affecting rural retail business people. And that's a similar stress. And they're also going through difficult times.
And certainly, as I've talked with bankers, you know, it's a lot easier to say yes to a loan than it is to say no. And they hurt and they feel right along with the families, and they need support too.
There's a lot of interdependence in a rural community.
There certainly is.
Try to focus on that in our meetings.
With the legislative session coming up here in about a month, with that in mind, I talked with Governor Branstad this week about the possibility of increased funding for farmer-to-farmer support programs, hotlines. It doesn't look good.
And so I wanted to share
Governor Branstad says he does not want to raise taxes, but under law the state cannot go into debt. That's why he's proposed reorganizing the state, cutting some programs to save money. He says there just won't be much left over for farmer-to-farmer type groups.
We must recognize that our resources are limited, and the crisis in the farm economy has caused the state to have to do some major restructuring and downsizing to live with the limited resources that we have. And as you know, we're going through that process now, reducing next year's budget by $107 million. And yet I think we can do it and make government more accountable and more efficient, but it certainly means we don't have a lot of additional resources.
Branstad agrees with Neil Harl about the future being tough, but he says eventually agriculture will turn around.
I feel very optimistic about the future of Iowa because we have a strong work ethic, we have a good education system, we have all the basic ingredients that make for success. And we need to pull together and work with each other and work in our local communities to make things better. And we're the ones that can do it.
We'll have more on our special coming up in a moment. The harvest of discontent. Its yield turned violent last week in eastern Iowa. Tonight we've looked at some of the emotions that may have led to that violence and what some experts say can be done to prevent it in the future. If we've been able to encourage just one person to reach out for help tonight, then we've been successful. I'd like to thank our studio guests, Peter Zievenbergen, Lynn County Mental Health Director, Gene Hood, Extension Human Development Specialist, and Joanne Dvorak of the Farmer to Farmer Group. And thank you for joining us. Good night.